And Bob, it sounds like we're getting a few people jumping on right now as we kind of get started here. And just wanted to say thank you very much, everyone. I wanted to invite you to my Motivational Monday calls. And this is just going to be something that I do once a week. And today we have the great pleasure of having Bob Golba, who is with Mountain Vista Real Estate up in Greeley, Colorado. Bob is basically the 5th largest producing brokerage firm in the state of Colorado. And when I chatted with Bob earlier on this, he wasn't quite sure where he stood. But Bob, I don't want to embarrass you, but I do have to brag a little bit about you. Bob has closed, his firm has almost closed $71 million year to date in the state of Colorado. Most of it is, or all of it, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's on new build, correct?
Yeah, probably 90% of it. I still have some other stuff that I do, but I keep a limit on it. But okay. That's correct.
All right. Well, welcome, Bob, and do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. And just wanted this to kind of be an open conversation. And I would like to start off by, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Bob? How long have you been in real estate? What got you into real estate? Can you tell us a little bit there?
You bet. I've actually been in real estate for 23 years. It's actually in October of 93, so I guess that's 24 years. 23 or 24 years that I've been in it, and early on I always liked new construction, so it's just kind of evolved over time to where I do predominantly new construction, but I've always liked that. So I came into the business because a good friend of mine called me out of the blue one day and asked me what I was doing, and I told her that I wasn't doing that much. I was kind of in between careers, if you will, and I was about 38 years old, and she said, you need to go in real estate. You're perfect for it. So that's actually how I started, and then she helped me when I first started going to introduce me to some people, which opened up some other doors. But that's how I actually got started in real estate.
Okay. All right. Now, have you always been working up in that northern market of Colorado?
Predominantly, yes. I usually go from about Firestone, Longmont area up to Wellington or the Wyoming border, if you will, but predominantly up there. I've done some stuff in the metro area, but very limited.
Okay. All right. Well, Bob, I'll tell you, one of the things that impressed me the most about your production and where you're at, and that is no matter where you are at in the state of Colorado, it could be up in Greeley, it could be down in Colorado Springs, it could be on the western slope. And for those who are on the phone right now, I want you all to understand that Bob has produced this type of business even in an area of town that's not the Denver metro. One would think that the most business is in the Front Range here by Denver Metro, and I just have to tell everyone that that's not the case. Obviously, Bob has a good hunger for business, and he's done a fabulous job. So, Bob, tell us all a little bit about your current team. Do you have a team of people that help you out?
Yes, I currently have 3 people that will help me with the new construction transactions. There's 3 people that are acting in an agent's role, and then we have 2 staff people that basically handle it once it's under contract. So I have a staff person that will handle basically from contract to closing, and then one that schedules the closings and works the walkthroughs and things like that. So it's actually 2 other staff people plus 3 licensed people.
Okay, all right. So tell me also, if you would, who was one of your number 1 mentors or influence in your career?
Sure. One of my number 1 mentors or influence in my career was actually the lady that recruited me, because she came out of the blue. We met years previously. We were both teaching in a handicap ski program up at Lake Eldora, and she remembered me, but she took me kind of under her wing when I started and taught me. But one thing I always tried to do too, when I was in an office, I would try to look at somebody that was maybe 20 years further along in the business that I was and how they were conducting themselves. So if there was somebody that I wanted to emulate, if you will, I kind of would hang with them a little bit, take them to lunch once in a while, ask them specific questions, because ultimately I wanted to be 20 years down the road where they were, just the way they handled themselves in a professional and personal manner.
Okay. And what has been one or two winning philosophies that you feel has contributed to your success? Can you share maybe one or two ideas there?
Sure. I think that one thing is you have to have a strong work ethic. Anybody that's got any experience in this business will know that it's a wonderful place to work because there's really no limit. If you want to work 24/7, you can work 24/7. I used to try to do that. I try to keep that in balance now. But the other thing I find that for people that have a great attitude, I think a great attitude goes a long way toward opening doors. People remember a smiling face or somebody with a very positive attitude a lot more than they remember somebody that has a frown on their face and really doesn't have a rosy outlook.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now, as far as like doing that attitude check that you do, what are some of the things that you consistently do on a day-to-day basis so that you roll out of bed with a good attitude? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it has to be in the hours that you aren't working. You try to put some emphasis on things that you can keep a good attitude about. For me, I like to read positive type books. If you were to read like The Butterfly Effect from Andy Andrews or something like that. Me personally, I like to also take passages from the Bible. But I like to read positive books because over time that will give you a positive outlook. You'll start to think in terms of, I don't know if any of you ever read Og Mandino or some of those ones that have been around for a long time. I'm reading probably some of the stuff that was passed around a little bit longer ago. There may be better updates for people to emulate now, but I always liked Og Mandino's book and some books along those lines.
Okay. Now, can you also walk me through a typical day for you? Tell us about your routine from the time that you do wake up until you go to bed at night. Can you walk us through a typical day in Bob's world?
A typical day. Typical day for me will typically start early. I'm an early riser, so probably by 6 o'clock I'm doing some of the prep work for when I start my day at 8 or 9 o'clock, and that'll be going over what was done yesterday, what is not done that has to be done today. So I'll make a checklist of things that I have to accomplish. And for realtors, we're in the sales world, we get paid for sales. I always have a 80-20 list. We all know that 20% of what you do makes 80% of your income. So if you always keep that 20% list in front of you, make those calls first, and make sure you never end a day without making that 20% of the calls. Because a lot of what we do doesn't produce income, but you have to consistently have a habit of making the calls that do produce income for you.
Well, can you give us, like, what are some of the disciplines? I mean, you just said that you have to make those phone calls every single day. Are we talking about time management? What are the disciplines behind that, Bob?
No, I think a realtor that is, especially if you're first starting out, you get to establish your patterns. And I think that having a disciplined approach is very good. We have the privilege of working in an arena that allows us to do whatever we want to with our schedule, basically. None of us usually have to answer too much to a managing broker or a sales manager or anything like that. But you have to ultimately answer to yourself and to your family if you have one. And I think that employing disciplines, I would encourage people to treat it like a job. If you were to say from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I'm working just like I would if I had an employer that I had to answer to, that's a good discipline because all of us put in a ton of hours, but some of those hours, if we were to look back at the end of the day and analyze what hours I spent actually that produced or that were involved in the line of work that I do and what of it was not, even if we're putting in 12 or 13-hour days, we'd probably find that 3 or 4 of those hours really had nothing to do with work.
Okay. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of just lead me into my next question, which kind of falls into place here, and that is, you know, this industry that we're in can be very taxing on not only our personal time, our business time, but also with our friends and family. How do you balance your work and personal life? Can you give us one or two bullet points on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage every one of you to if you have a spouse, you know, make time for that spouse, schedule a date, things like that, because it is too easy as you get successful. One of the trappings of success, and I've learned it the hard way, is as you get more successful, there's more demands on your time, more distractions, and that can easily interfere with your family time if you have that. So keeping the right balance, what I would do is establish that pattern also and keep to that pattern. We all have times when we got to deal with a counter proposal or something that is time sensitive and it goes into the night, but I would try to keep a cap on it, even if that means there's 3 nights a week that I don't do anything after 5 o'clock or something like that, something that is a consistent thing that you can do and stick to.
So what does that balance look like to you? I mean, you say that you could get a counter or something like that and you might be with family at that time. Are you dropping what you're doing with the family, or are you literally telling the client or customer or other agent, what have you, hey, I've got other things that I'm doing right now, can I get back with you? I mean, obviously you're probably not doing that, but tell me, how does that balance look like for you?
Sure. What I try to do, all of us will have a time when you have to write a contract because there's going to be multiple offers. But outside of that, what I try to do is I tell people they can call me anytime they want. They can call me 24 hours a day. I usually call back between 8 and 5 simply because 95% of what we do does not require us to be accessible 24/7 like some people think we need to be accessible. Right. And I think if you can draw that line with your clients, and it took me a lot of years to even have the courage to do that, but I'd encourage any of you out there that might be newer in your career, draw that line. If you draw it properly, the people will respect you and they will respect the line that you draw.
As long as you kind of lay out the ground rules, is that what I kind of heard?
Exactly. What you don't want to do is, if someone calls you at 7 o'clock at night and you don't call them back for 2 days, that's, you know, shame on you. But
right.
If you just tell people, hey, a lot of times I'm tied up with my family at night, so if you leave me a message, I'll get it, but you may not hear from me till 8 in the morning unless it's an absolute emergency. But most of what we deal with, I tell people, I'm not a doctor. Most of the stuff we deal with can wait till the morning.
Right. Nobody's going to die over a contract, in other words. Right?
That's right, Randy. They might think they're going to,
yes.
But they don't. I haven't had anybody do that yet.
I know. Knock on wood, I've been doing this for 27 years myself, and I've never seen that happen. People always think that it's the end of the world or that, you know, death is upon them or the sky is falling, but at the end of the day, you're right. Things can be handled in a timely fashion, but it doesn't have to necessarily take away from your personal life. Is that correct? Would you say that that is a thing that you live by?
I would. That's so right on, Randy. I'd encourage every those guys to write down what he just said, because if you can stick to that, it'll make your career a lot more pleasant.
Okay. All right. So I know a lot of agents. I've worked with a ton of them in my 27 years. And Bob, a lot of them get stuck on the real estate roller coaster, okay? How do you maintain the consistency through the ups and downs in our industry? What do you do on a regular basis to continue to do the type of volume that you do?
No, that's a good question. A lot of times people don't realize, I used to say, and like you said, the real estate roller coaster, I used to say in this business you don't lose your builder, you just lose your turn. So exit on good terms because you're liable to be back with them in a couple of years. And I've always done that because there are times when with different accounts, sometimes it's just if you've been with somebody for 4 or 5 years, both of you need a break, for lack of a better way to put it, because you get familiar, you get comfortable. Sometimes getting comfortable is not necessarily a good thing, but sometimes there just needs to be a break. There can be a change in the market, and if any of you have worked with those type of accounts, those are driven guys, and they don't really care if the market's changed or not. They think their product should always be increasing in prices and volume. And so that may or may not be the case, but I think what you always want to do is, if you do leave one, always leave under good terms and leave the door open for working with the future, because you go through cycles. There's times when I was doing new construction in the 2007 and 2008, and nobody wanted to do new construction because you'd waste your weekends doing open houses, which we did. But when you're servicing the account and you're thinking long term, that we always knew when the market turned, you would want to have accounts that were new construction again, because the market will always turn. Colorado's a wonderful place to be, and it will stay that way in the foreseeable future, and those things turn around. So you have to do some things that are considered a waste of time that are just a way of servicing the account, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it.
Okay, all right. Going to shift gears a little bit here on you, but tell us, what habits did you instill early in your career that got you where you are today?
Yeah, that's great. There has to be, you have to have a balance, and you have to have, I think, a very consistent work habit. So I established some of mine early on. One of the ones I already talked about was getting a lot done before 8 o'clock that was paperwork related, or the stuff that we don't like to do. There's usually a good salesperson is not very good with paperwork, of which I am definitely in that class. But you make it, it's also a necessary evil, if you will. So a lot of that stuff I'll do before 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock will be before I get with customers, because the minute I meet a customer, I'll put that paperwork aside so fast it'll make your head spin. But I think you can, having a disciplined approach to what you do, which is, like, for me, it's from 6 to 9, that's when I do that stuff, and from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock is when I'm doing the rest of my stuff. So everybody's sleep clock is different. Not everybody likes to get up at 4:30 like I do, but some people are way better at that kind of stuff at 9 o'clock at night, when I can't even hardly think straight.
Mm-hmm. It's because you got up at 4:30 in the morning.
That's right.
And I'll tell you, out of all the people that I've been chatting with lately, some of the more successful people are always getting up early, and they have some sort of regiment that they're doing, like exercise. Do you implement some exercise into your daily habits?
Yes, absolutely. As I get older, I'm 61, and as I get older, that gets to be a more important part of it. So I do try to incorporate that in the before 8 o'clock stuff. I live close to my health club, and so a lot of times I'm over there about 6 or 6:15 for 45 minutes to an hour, because for me, if I don't do it before 8, I won't do it. When I come home at night, I just usually don't have the drive, if you will, to go over and work out. So for me, I have to do it in the morning, but workout is usually 4 times a week in some fashion.
Okay. So you get to the office about 8 o'clock. I heard you say at about 8 or 9 is when you're kind of crashing for the day, right? Are you?
Yeah.
That's the way I am sometimes too. But are you putting in a good, solid 12-hour day work day?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I have a good, solid 12 hours of activity. Not all of it's work-related. Some of it may be workout and things like that. But usually from about 6 o'clock till 6 o'clock at night, yes, I'm very busy. Most of it's work, but some of it's the other stuff too.
Okay. All right. What is the number one? Give me one or two things. Let me put it this way. Give me one or two things that you can share with other agents that would help them in master selling, listing more property, or being a professional in negotiations. Can you give us 2 or 3 really good ideas that you can share?
Yeah, I think that what I would suggest is, it takes lots of practice to do all of those, so always put yourself in a position. Nobody wants to put themselves in an uncomfortable position when it comes to the negotiating part of it, but know when you're there that that's the time for the biggest growth. I always tell my guys that I will learn more from my defeats than I do from my victories. So when someone doesn't buy a house off me and I usually try to find out why. I'll stay after an agent till they call me back and tell me what they did buy, only because I do learn from my losses, like why didn't you choose us? And I do it not condescendingly, but in a way that I'd like to learn, so you can learn things about that help your company. You can learn things about yourself that help you. The other thing is we all go through slow markets, and I always encourage myself and my guys, it's when you're in the slow markets that you have to stay busy. It's easy to say there's not much going on today, I'm not going to do anything, but if you take the time that would work, what I try to do during those slow times is take the time to develop something new inside of your system that I always tell people I repair my nets. So when the fish are biting again, I catch more fish. So I'll work on systems when it's slow that will make me more efficient when it is busy so I can gather more sales when it is busy.
Okay. All right. So, we're at that time of the year where most agents are kind of programmed to say, well, there's just not a lot of activity during the winter months. Things are slower. Listings are harder to get. Buyers don't necessarily buy. What are you doing today so that, you take you out of that mindset and you're really, truly focusing in on how to drum up business today in our market today? What do you do?
Yeah, well, and part of it by staying busy and staying out there, keeping the pulse of the beat of the street is very important. I think that when I was early on, I just did not allow myself to be idle because it's easy to do. And so that can be different things. This can be the time of year where you start to forge relationships that will pay you next year, whether it's to meet a builder if you're targeting a builder, or meet lenders that you might network with. You send me business, I'll send you business. I think I'd try to fill my day when it's a little bit slower on setting the groundwork for the next good run. So I think we're always networking, and sometimes we don't realize that, but to spend the time to forge networks and open new doors during the time when it's slow, that will always come back to work well for you. I've even done it working with other realtors. There's other realtors I get to know while it's slow because we're doing different things together. And I've picked up referrals, or I've picked up other business just from doing stuff with realtors too. So everybody can be a source of business for you, and I think you have to treat every day as if there'll be a new future source of business for you, and you don't have to know, you don't have to have a preconceived notion of where that's going to come from.
Do you pick up your direct marketing during this period of time? I mean, what kind of direct marketing do you do, or online marketing, social media? What do you do, Bob?
Yeah, we'll try to, each time it gets a little slow, we'll try to incorporate something, each of those that we do a little bit better. I am just learning the intricacies, if you will, of the social media marketing. So actually we spent a lot of time with that over the last couple of weeks because it is slow, so we try to say, okay, how can we improve for the next busy run? So we're just learning that. A lot of our communication, a lot of my communication is actually to other realtors that are my best customers. I don't spend a lot of money publicly because when you're with builders, when you sell one house, there's another house right behind it. So for me, realtors are my best source of advertising. It's my most cost-effective. And every time one of the realtors sells one of my properties, then I have another one right behind it because the bank frees them up money to go do another spec. So I have another listing right behind it. So it keeps things going. So I've had a tendency to target realtors more than I do the public, actually. But right now, because we have those mechanisms good, what I'm trying to do over the next 15 months, say, or by the end of next year, is how can I do the better job with accessing the public to increase our sales too. So we're going to work on that.
All right. So most of the people, Bob, that are on this call, they're kind of independent real estate agents. They may work for a big company, or they might be, working for a smaller. It doesn't really matter. But a lot of agents really would like to get in with a builder. How do you get in with a builder, and how do you really, make that first effort? What are some of the tactics that you do to generate a relationship with a builder?
Sure. I think that a lot of people, what I did early on was I was able to, and the market's changed a little bit where a lot of the big builders up here, there's still a lot of local builders, and you can still achieve it. There was times when we would have a subdivision, say, that had 3 or 4 local builders or somewhat national builders. I didn't have a listing. So I talked to some of the agents that had those listings and say, hey, do you mind if I sit an open house out here? It's better, you got a better chance to meet a customer than you do sitting in your office. So they would let me do that. And over the course of time, I met other builders, not the builder that I was helping the realtor with. You never want to try to cut them out or anything like that. But as you got to know people, they would open other doors for you in other areas because of the way you conducted yourself. I always had a positive attitude. I tried to sell everybody stuff so that we could all move on. And so I think that that's one way to do it. It's hard. Another thing that is if you can bring something of value to a builder. In other words, if you have a chance to get an appointment with one of them and say what's important to you and listen to what they're saying, because they're usually looking for ground. You might go out and try to find that ground for them and bring that project to them. I've always told them, if I bring a project to you, I'd like to have a crack at doing the marketing for you, and they let